Good morning, everyone. My name is Carolyn Hart Bennett, and today I'm going to read to you Chapter 8A from my book, Seven Sisters, The Voyage. The immigrants were in excellent spirits after the successful 4th of July celebration, and soon thereafter they started looking forward to the next celebration, which would take place when they finished their quota of tents and wagon covers. This gave everyone a renewed incentive to help with the project. The tent committee kept the saints supplied with needles, threads, and canvas, and they stitched and chatted and sang as they worked. The children were kept out of the way at their reading classes, studying ocean life, and playing all the games Phoebe and Fanny could think of. They loved tag, Red Rover, and hide and seek. Drop the Hanky and London Bridge were favorites with the toddlers. George and Lavinia were now inseparable as they worked closely on the music for the tent ceremony. The band practiced on the poop deck each afternoon and kept everyone's toes tapping while they stitched. As the days passed, the routines, work, and leisure time of the saints and sailors coincided about as smoothly as President Bramwell and Captain Hudson could have hoped for, and the crew was getting used to the once annoying things the saints did. Dealing with the number of bodies on deck and having to move from one place to another was a trick for any group of working men to adjust to. Oftentimes, the saints would cross from one part of the ship to the other on the rat lines. They were skilled and could move rapidly, especially on laundry days when the saints were gathered for full company sacrament meetings on Sundays. The crew liked the first week of the voyage best when everyone was seasick and stayed below where they belonged. But seasickness wasn't to be counted on again unless they ran into an overly long or tempestuous storm. However, the weather had been cooperating nicely for the saints, and the ship was making good progress. That is, until the wind stopped blowing one afternoon. The saints were on deck working and playing and didn't notice that the ship was slowing down. But when the mainsail deflated with a deafening crash, they were startled as they looked up and saw the sail flopping down next to the mast. The sound of the crash had roused the captain from his cabin, and he soon gave orders to Mr. Huntley to brace the spars. The sailors quickly went to work, tossing commands back and forth. The saints were ordered below to give the crew uninhibited working conditions. Within seconds of the first crashing sail, the other sails followed, making loud sounds as well, sometimes 2 or 3 at a time, scaring the children and many of the adults as they scurried below. The saints expected the wind to pick up in an hour or two, but the ocean swells became smoother and flatter, and the motion of the ship was soon non-existent. It was as though they were anchored back in the roads, waiting to sail from Kent. The next morning it was an interesting phenomenon to stroll the deck and look out at the plate glass water. It was a little unnerving to be stuck in the middle of the ocean and not be able to go anywhere. But it was convenient that it was Sunday, and the saints would be having their company-wide sacrament meeting together. Most everyone arrived on deck early and chatted with each other as they looked out at the still water. During the voyage, the ship's speed had varied from a tremendous clip of 14 knots to as slow as 2 knots, but there had always been ripples or waves. It was eerie to be so stationary. "Good morning, brothers and sisters," President Bramwell began. "Welcome to ocean travel. The captain has informed me that what we are experiencing today is only a temporary condition that happens all the time. He calls it a spell of settled weather, where there are nice, gentle conditions for a few days. He says it can't be classified as the doldrums because we are too far north for that. But in any condition, we will have to be mindful of our rations, because if we're stuck here for very long, it could spell disaster for our supplies. We ask you to pray in your individual prayers as well as in your ward prayer meetings for the wind to pick up." The saints seemed relieved with this information, but were still anxious to know what was in store for them. They knew they would have to make the best of the situation. Before long, they had moved on in their thinking and were deeply absorbed in prayers, singing, and sermons of the sacrament meeting. After the meeting and lunchtime and noontime lunch, the saints came back on deck with their scriptures and journals. They sat with their families and enjoyed the warm afternoon, reading, recording their thoughts, singing, and playing quietly. It seemed to be hotter than usual on deck. and the saints started to fan themselves with hankies or their hymnals as the afternoon wore on. It felt different without the ocean breeze acting as a coolant. The sun beat down on the water and reflected back its heat onto the deck, adding to the discomfort. There was a little relief when the sun went down, but not much. The next morning, when they made their way to the top deck, they found that the captain had ordered the crew to drape awnings made from extra sails so the saints could sit under them and be more comfortable as they stitched their tents and wagon covers. Only a few were not sewing. A watchmaker examined the internal parts of a watch. Some older men played card games and checkers, and a few mothers tended their babies. The seven sisters busily set up their spot under one of the new awnings so they could sew their wagon cover in the shade. "It was nice of the crew to spread this awning for us," said Lizzie as she glanced in Alfie's direction. Eleanor was the only one who noticed the smile across Lizzie's lip as her eyes connected with Alfie's. Then she saw the recognition he gave her as he touched the corner of his cap and made a quick salute. "Are we going to be stuck here forever?" Phoebe complained. Lizzie chimed in. "Captain Hudson says every voyage experience is becalming for a few days, even as long as a week sometimes." "I don't know which is worse," said Caroline, "being bucked off the deck or standing still like a fish pond on a breathless summer morning." "The ship is so steady I haven't fallen down in 3 days," said Lavinia in all seriousness. "What if we run out of food and water?" asked Fanny. "President Tippett said we're going to cut... Let me back up here. President Tippett said we're going on half rations starting tomorrow," Eleanor explained, "if the wind doesn't pick up." "The water I got this morning was almost black," said Lizzie, "and it stank." Lavinia shuddered. "They burn the barrels inside before they put the water in. That's why it gets so black." "If we keep ourselves busy enough, we won't have to think about black water," chided Eleanor. Susanna studied the twins' face. "Aren't you two having fun leading the games?" "We've played every game we can think of," said Phoebe dismally. "Have you thought about jumping rope?" offered Eleanor. "I wonder if Captain Hudson would let you use some of the lines." Fanny stopped what she was doing. "Let's go ask him, Phoebe." The twins ran off together, dodging men, women, and children as they headed for the captain's cabin. They giggled gleefully as they knocked on the door. The captain was working on some charts on his desk with Huntley. "Enter," he yelled. The twins were just a little afraid of the captain and became serious as they entered the cabin. "Captain Hudson, Mr. Huntley," began Phoebe, "could we please talk to you?" Irritated, the captain snapped, "Make it short. Mr. Huntley and I are busy." Fanny took over. "We're on the Children's Exercise Committee, and we wondered if you had any ropes you weren't using that we might borrow for jumping." "During this snail's pace, we've got plenty of lines we're not using," said Huntley. "How many do you want?" The twins looked at each other, not believing their good fortune. "I think 2 would be enough," said an elated Phoebe. "We can supply those," said the captain, winking at Huntley. The twins shrieked with delight. All right," said Huntley, holding his ears. "I'll gather them up for you." The captain leaned back in his chair as Huntley left the cabin. "And what about the boys?" he said. "We've been trying hard to think of something for them to do," said Fanny. Getting a wry smile on his face, the captain opened his desk drawer. "Well, I have something that might help entertain them." He drew out a small leather pouch. "I only bring these out when the ship is this steady." "What's inside?" asked Phoebe. The captain poured the contents of the bag into his hand. "Ooh, marbles!" gasped Fanny. Each twin picked up a marble and held it between her thumb and forefinger in shooting position. They flipped it into their other hands as Captain Hudson went to his closet. "Here's an oriental rug to keep the marbles from rolling around the deck," he said, as he rolled it out on the floor to show them its size. "Thank you, Captain Hudson. You're a real lifesaver," said Fanny, kissing the captain on the cheek before he had time to straighten back up. Smiling and a bit embarrassed, the captain stammered, "You two are welcome." He rolled the rug back up and gave it to the twins, who went bursting out of the captain's cabin, almost running into Huntley for a second time on the voyage. "Whoa, slow down, twinsies." "Here you go," he said, giving each one a rope. "Thanks, Mr. Huntley," they chimed as he went back into the captain's cabin. The twins shouted to all the children on deck that they had secured some new games for everyone to meet them by the mizzenmast. Before long, there were 2 groups of girls jumping the long ropes, and Matthew was spreading out the oriental rug and getting the marble tournament all figured out with the boys. Girls from 8 to 18 lined up and took turns running in, jumping a few times and running back out. They easily caught on to this new activity and thoroughly enjoyed themselves on the non-moving deck. After a few minutes, Hudson and Huntley emerged from the captain's cabin to witness the fun. They stood and watched as the girls ran in and out. Then, after one girl vacated her jumping spot, the captain suddenly left his place of observation and ran and jumped in, surprising everyone, including Huntley. He was unexpectedly agile as he jumped. The children burst out giggling at this funny sight, and soon the adults on deck were smiling and watching his uncharacteristic display of unbridled abandon. Not paying any mind to what anyone thought, the captain chanted, "A sailor went to sea, to see what he could see, and all that he could see, was the bottom of the deep blue sea. Then he ran out, and the audience of sailors and saints erupted into applause and cheers, while the captain tried to catch his breath. Then he gave a little bow to his enthusiasts. "Captain, I didn't know you had it in you," said Huntley, slapping him on the back. "I didn't either," gasped the captain. "I think I'd better turn the rope for a while to catch my breath." "I need to catch my breath too, just from watching you," chortled Huntley. They both relieved the twins who had been turning the ends of the rope. With this small gesture, the captain suddenly became a friend to all the children on deck and received the admiration of their parents as well. Titus turned to his mates, rolled his eyes. "I'm going to my quarters. I can't bear to watch the captain losing his noggin over these parasites. Anybody coming with me?" Griswold, Jabez, and Alfie followed their leader down the corridor, all muttering disparaging remarks as they went. "This day was almost as fun as the 4th of July, said Fanny to Phoebe, as she went to the end of the line to wait for her turn to jump. Tired of jumping rope, Phoebe wandered over to the boys who were enjoying their marble game. "Can girls play?" questioned Phoebe upon her arrival. Matthew looked up. "Sure, but you won't last long. The game is to see who can knock the most marbles off the rug." He smiled as he let her pick a taw. "I'm first," he said as he took aim and blasted a marble off the rug. The boys cheered. "I hope you don't get tired of waiting for your turn," he said to her as he got in position and knocked another marble across the deck. There were enough boys gathered around that the marbles didn't roll very far. The third shot smacked its target, but only moved the marble to the edge of the rug. "Drat," said Matthew. Phoebe gathered up her skirt and knelt down. She held her taw and huffed on it a couple of times to give it traction. Then, leaning down low with her bumpus higher than her head, she aimed and flipped her taw with surprising speed, sending the mark flying off the rug. "Lucky shot," mocked Matthew. "You think so?" Phoebe questioned as she lined up her next shot. Wham! The other boys marveled at her skill, while Matthew simmered. She fired off shot after shot with deadly accuracy, and in no time at all, she was down to one last marble. "You're going to miss," Matthew taunted with disgust. Phoebe smiled as she took aim. Then a flabbergasted Matthew watched as she sent the last marble to join the other banished orbs. "You cheated," Matthew blurted out. "Don't you call me a cheater," she said, and before he could duck, she reached across the rug and slugged him in the eye. "Ow!" yelled Matthew as he rubbed his eye. "If you weren't a girl—" Marcus Fielding, who had been watching the annihilation, quickly stepped between them. "Hold it, you two. That's enough marbles for one day." Matthew whimpered as he picked up his marbles and headed away to obtain some sympathy from his mother. "Phoebe, how did you learn to shoot marbles that way?" said Marcus in amazement. "Having 3 brothers helped a lot," interjected Susanna, who had come over to retrieve Phoebe at the behest of Sister Walmsley, who had tattled. "Phoebe seemed to have whipped the best marble player on board," said Marcus, "and he didn't take it very kindly. Someone will be sporting a black eye tomorrow." "Phoebe, who did you hit?" scolded Susanna. Phoebe was still steaming. "Matthew said I cheated, and I couldn't let him get away with that." "Phoebe, sometimes you need to let boys win at their own game. It makes them feel more manly," said Susanna. Phoebe's mouth dropped open. "But what if I'm better than they are?" Susanna was caught off guard and hesitated. Matthew jumped in on Phoebe's side. "Then I'd say those boys need to practice a little harder. Phoebe was thrilled that Brother Fielding agreed with her. She looked triumphantly at Susanna. "That's what I say," she said as she skipped away to find Fanny, who was still jumping rope. Susanna raised her eyebrows in wonder at Marcus. Then he tried to justify his remarks. "Well, it doesn't make me feel more manly if I succeed only because my opponent didn't try her best." "So you don't like it when girls hold back?" "I like a girl who is straightforward and honest," he ventured. Susanna had never heard a man talk like this before. It was rather refreshing. She smiled up at Marcus. "I'll keep that in mind, Elder Fielding." Their tete-a-tete was soon broken up by the sound of Matthew blowing his trumpet to signal dinner. He stood sideways as he blew, trying to shield his left eye from view. It was already starting to discolor above the cheekbone, and he was more than a little embarrassed about what had happened to him. That's the end of chapter 8a. Stay tuned for chapter 8b. Over